I'm walking down the street.
I do want to say to Doni and many of you in this room that over a very long career in this city, all of you have helped me and my colleagues tell the truth and to try to tell.
I may not look like you and you me, but
Take my hat up.
I'm South Carolina, so I just...
gotta be you.
What does this event mean to you, Miss Peggy Mars?
Oh, my heart,
Happy 20th anniversary.
my heart is about loving up on my sisters. Do you know what it feels like to have your sisters in the room? Johnny.
Gotta be me and dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. I am beautiful, I am blessed, but not just what you see in the flesh. I'm free from people, free from myself. There's a
The doctor lived next door to the janitor to the reverend and the lawyer. We were together. Now we get so high and mighty that you create stress for your society because you don't like poor black folks either. That's a health problem. Get yourself together so I can stop being taking care of geriatric people and get back to pediatrics. I thank you, Doni, for all you've done. Let's keep doing it all the more.
letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. And I dare you, I dare you, I dare you to be you.
First name's Doni, last name's Glover. In it to win it for the long haul, baby. All right, all right, all right. Some hot tea going on here. How you doing out there? It's election time. Oh, it's election time. Yes, it is. Up in here. Who's running for mayor of the city of Baltimore? Who's running for city council president? Who's running for city council? Who is in the election? Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me something good. So last week we had Vinroy July on. Vinroy July is running for city council in the 9th district. We also have a young lady, Sonia Edie, who's running for city council in the 9th district. And then, of course, we have the incumbent, Dr. John Bullock. Dr. Bullock, how are you, sir?
Doni Glover, I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
Welcome to the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
How's it feel? How you feeling today?
Look, I'm feeling pretty good. Spring is here now. I will say, it's great being outside, talking to people, having those kinds of conversations around the work we're doing, but also just feeling energized as well.
What are the boundaries of the 9th district?
So the 9th district, it goes, we have West and Southwest Baltimore. So we go east to Fremont, west to Hilton, north we're right around Pressbury and Lawrence, and then south to Wilkins. Now that's the current boundaries of the 9th district. We're also now going to be expanding and picking up some additional territory that is also further south and further west.
What college did you go to?
So I've been blessed. One of the things that I will say to anybody, my story, I'm a first generation college student. I was blessed and fortunate to get a full scholarship to go to Hampton University, full academic scholarship. Some people know I'm also a runner, so I had athletic scholarship offers, but I took the academic route, and I got a full scholarship to Hampton University. I had some great mentors there, Black PhDs, and one who told me when I was 18 years old that I could get a PhD. And I tucked that away. I wound up then getting my master's from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Also very blessed in that I had full funding to do so. So I got a master's in city and regional planning because I've always been interested around how neighborhoods are constructed, how do we develop neighborhoods. My focus there was on housing and community development. So as an undergrad, I studied political science. In my master's program, I studied housing and community development and economic development and trying to learn how to push our neighborhoods forward. After that, I worked in DC for the executive office of the mayor for a few years, and then in transportation as a planner. And then I wound up getting my doctorate from the University of Maryland at College Park. Again, blessed to have, a full funding, had a research assistantship. And so I'm a story of what's possible in terms of education, right? I mean, that, you can, have parents who, want the best for you, teachers and coaches and mentors who want the best for you. And I've been blessed to be able to get a bachelor's, master's, a PhD, and now being the council member for the 9th District, and also teaching urban government and politics and metropolitan studies at Towson University.
Where'd you grow up?
So one of the things I love to tell folks is that I went from West Philadelphia to West Baltimore. And quite frankly, the way that, I, look at this neighborhood that I live in now, really, it reminded me so much of where I grew up. What I will tell you is that, I had family and friends who struggled with addiction, unemployment, incarceration. And I was always wondering why my neighborhood looked the way that it did. And so, so when I was in school, I was always asking questions around government and politics and race and all the things that came along with that. And so it seemed like a natural avenue in terms of studying the things I wound up studying in college. But yeah, so from West Philadelphia, one of the things I would also say, and I believe there's no mistakes, right? And I believe, the supreme architect, God is divine. I actually grew up in West Philadelphia and off of Baltimore Avenue in West Philadelphia. Wow. And here I am now in West Baltimore. And been here 19 years, almost 20.
Who was your best friend growing up?
I love these questions. This is great. Actually, you know what's so funny? One of my best friends later on became my fraternity brother. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. So my best friend in elementary school and in high school was a guy named Dwayne Davis. He wound up becoming an engineer as well, went to Temple University. We ran track against each other in high school. He's still a runner. Actually, it's funny. He came down, this was around 5-6 years ago. We ran the Baltimore 10 miler together. And so for me, we played basketball together as young people, ran, walking through the streets and dealing with some of the challenges of growing up in our neighborhood. So I've had the opportunity to really, see what things look like on the ground, and also still maintain relationships and connections with folks who are doing some really great work. So I encourage folks to look into different career paths. Even though I chose, political science and city planning, he chose engineering and technology. There are so many pathways for our young people to get engaged with and to be involved in.
When you think of Baltimore, in East Baltimore, there's one Behemoth. Is that how you pronounce it, Behemoth?
Or Behemoth? Yeah.
Behemoth.
Uh-huh.
The Behemoth in East Baltimore is Johns Hopkins. As a matter of fact, when my grandma, this was back in 1950, I'll never forget the story told to me. My grandma said, and this was a story from my dad's sister-in-law. She's gone now, but she said, Granny said in 1950, don't go to Johns Hopkins Hospital. Now you can relax. We're not talking about Johns Hopkins. That's the Behemoth in East Baltimore. Over there in your district, there's a different Behemoth, the University of Maryland.
Right.
What is the tension between University of Maryland and the black people just up the block, like in Poe Homes? What's the beef?
It is such an interesting question, and I'm glad you asked it. So one, I'll just say in disclosure, so I have two sons. They were both born at the University of Maryland Medical Center.
My daughter was born there.
And it's funny, I was born in the hospital, University of Pennsylvania. So I can look at what happens with universities in neighborhoods, whether it be West Philadelphia or West Baltimore. But let's focus on the University of Maryland. One of the things that's a reality we have to really face is how race has played out in the city, but also geographic boundaries. So historically, the University of Maryland didn't look any further west than Martin Luther King Boulevard. And we know that historically, if you look around the country, MLK, Boulevard, Street, what have you, has always been one of these demarcation lines from a racial perspective. Now, I would say over the last, 10 and 15 years, there's been more effort in the area of near MLK Boulevard, but also in the Poppleton area. So what you have is now the University of Maryland, Baltimore Biopark, right, which has also been a piece. And so you have the Biopark, you have the Community Engagement Center as well, but also those development pressures is the larger point, right? So you have the fact that the university did acquire additional properties for its development purposes. And we see this in cities across the country. It does put some
tension in Temple. Temple is one case that I've followed over the years, how Temple, very revered and loved nationally, but the people who lived around Temple, they hated it.
Look, I will tell you, Temple in North Philly, I used to go to summer programs in Temple, and I can tell you what Temple looked, or North Philly looked like in the early 90s and where it is now. I can tell you about West Philly and University of Pennsylvania. I could talk about, my mother was actually raised in Harlem, and we could talk about Columbia University and what's happened in terms of Harlem, right? So there are examples around the country of what this looks like. Now, on the east side, there are
let's not skate over it. Let's explain it.
Oh yeah, no, it's important. What you will find is that many institutions of higher education are also either in or proximate to neighborhoods that are historically Black. And then when expansion happens, it tends to happen into the areas that are largely Black. You can also look at the University of Chicago, same situation, right? And that because when you look at development, oftentimes what happens is you want to, that if you're trying to expand, whether it be a university or any other entity, you're looking at the areas that are least valued, right? Or the ones you can acquire at the lowest price. And so historically, that has been the case. Not only to mention that, over time, and we're talking about the 50s, 60s, urban renewal was also a policy that was utilized around the country, right? And so again, some of these areas that had been either defined as blighted or slums or what have you, and using the power of eminent domain to acquire properties. So there's also that. And so not only in the midst of that, you also have, again, an institution that is large. You have public housing, which is also in the midst of it. And then you also have some legacy homeowners and renters in the area. So it's an interesting mix of young professionals who've come in and who've also raised the prices of rent and housing in the area, that kind of tension, right? Where some have been then pushed out economically. We have also what happened in terms of a development project, right? That is still ongoing. And I mentioned eminent domain, and that was a policy that was used, right? Which also then moved people out of the area. So you have these pressures, and so that has resulted in some ways for folks to have negative feelings, right? To either recognize that they've either lost connections, lost relationships, lost community, but also the fearful nature of what happens in the community, not only now but moving forward.
There will be an interesting story. This is just north of the 9th, but when I look at Coppin State, when I look at the properties below North Avenue, Coppin has now expanded from Baker Street all the way up to Gwynns Falls. So 4 blocks below North Avenue is Baker Street. I can tell you that in between Baker and North Avenue, that was Warwick Avenue, Thomas Avenue, Whitmore. And within those areas were a lot of my friends were killed. It was an alley in between Warwick and Thomas Avenue. We all cut through that alley. I remember my first semester away at Morehouse, 1983, I get the phone call that Daryl Motley had been killed in that alley. He was probably the most popular kid in our neighborhood. God rest his soul. Phenomenal basketball player, phenomenal football player. Kid had every color Converse in the book. I mean, you name it. But he was gone. And it made me so glad that I was able to escape. But I can tell you, in that area, the properties that got taken up by eminent domain or however it was taken by Coppin, I'm glad they're gone. There were people who were living there that probably may not feel the same way. I would imagine that they were compensated. But when I look at that swath of land now, the stress is gone. I mean, sometimes we grow up in environments that are deadly.
Yeah.
But because you're so used to it, you can't imagine anything else.
So let me jump in here because I think, you make such an excellent point. One thing I'll just share with you, I remember I was 12 when the first person I know that got killed. So I was 12, he was 13. He lived 3 doors down from me, Matthew Booker, right? I was in 7th grade, he was in 8th grade. And unfortunately, it was a time period in the 90s where there's a lot going on and folks were getting killed over jackets and sneakers and stuff like this. And that was the situation that happened to him, right?
Starter jacket, coach jackets.
Yeah, I mean, and if I'm really honest with you, I talked about being a runner. One of the ways I found out I was fast was in a situation like that, right? So you think about fight or flight, and I realized I can't outfight 7 guys, so so I ran. But one of the things that I'll also say, since you mentioned, Coppin State and that footprint, one of the roles I've also had over the years has been as the president of the Coppin Heights Community Development Corporation, right? And so when you start looking at this area of Coppin Heights and what it means in terms of development, yes, you can talk about the university, but what about the houses around it? And I say this as an educator, but also as a father. When I think about sending my young person or my young boys to school, I want them to be in an environment that's safe. I want them to be in an environment that's flourishing. And for the university to actually be successful, that North Avenue is really the gateway to the university. And it's also a gateway in our city. So I hear you exactly, right? There are some things that are unhealthy that folks have become accustomed to, right? And I say, self-included in terms of some of the unfortunate things we see around us, right? But blight and vacancy and dumping does not have to be the way. But there's also a way to do development without displacement, right? So again, if we're talking about properties that have been vacant for 10 and 15 and 20 years, and then rehabbing those, putting those back on the market, that's a fantastic thing, right? But then are we also going to have folks who are homeowners, folks who are who look like the folks who are in the neighborhood? Diversity is great and all, but again, can we make sure that there are opportunities and pathways for home ownership and opportunities for development within the community? So I think, we see a great opportunity. I know there's the West North Avenue Development Authority there. I mentioned Coppin Heights Community Development Corporation. There are some other, small and medium-sized developers who are looking at, that whole entire area. Again, we think about, and you mentioned the 1950s. Right. And my father and my parents are passed. Right. But I think about, the fact that when they talk about what communities look like in the 40s and 50s, and especially around our historically Black colleges, right, we have to then, put more resources, more emphasis and more care into those communities.
I'm getting ready to get deep on you, cousin. Can we convince an upwardly mobile, educated Black woman to move into the 9th district? Or is she more likely to go to Owens Mills, paying them exorbitant rents for some prefab houses, overpriced? Takes me back to 08.
It's a great question, and it's a real question, to be honest with you, right? So oftentimes it seems like the city and our district is in a battle as it relates to attracting and retaining those residents. And as you mentioned, educated single Black woman. I will give you an example. I was knocking on doors yesterday and knocked on the door of a woman, and I won't tell her name, but I'll just say I knocked on the door. She's 40 years old. She's a Black woman, educated. She comes to the door. She's wearing a Hillman College sweatshirt. And for those of you familiar, with the different world, Hillman is the fictional Black college represented. But I tell everyone that Hillman is really based upon Hampton University, my alma mater, again, HBCU in Virginia.
I thought it was Spelman.
No, what's interesting, it was filmed, and a lot of the filming was done in Atlanta. And I know you're familiar with the AUC. So a lot of the filming and some of the stills were from some of the AUC, the Atlanta University Center.
But it was co-ed.
But if you think about Hampton, the co-ed university in Virginia, and if you look about some of the episodes, even when they have a university museum, Hampton is the Black college that has a university museum. So if you start an Underground Railroad and all that, when you start peeling it back, you'll see all that. And also Hampton's rival, Norfolk State, Hillman's rival is Norton. So again, I can tell you little snippets here and there. But anyway, I talked to her, and she's employed with one of the larger companies in the city. And check this out, Doni, you'll love this. So then I go a couple houses down and knock on the door of someone who's also been a supporter. And she mentions, yes, I'm in a developer program and I helped to redo a house down the street and we recently sold it. And I said, you know what? I talked to that, and this is two Black women. One's a Black woman who's in her, I would say, early 60s, and another Black woman in her 40s. And their connection was one helped to redevelop the house that the one lives in and bought, and also raised the comps. And when we talk about the comparable home prices in the area. So again, there are opportunities, but I have to be honest with you, and you know this as well. When we start looking at issues of safety in neighborhoods, it's hard. It can be a hard sell in some parts where you look at some of the challenges, whether if you're next door to a vacant property, or if you're dealing with issues of crime, right? So I understand that there is that tension. I still see the glass is half full. I still see a lot of potential there, but again, make no mistake about it, we do have our challenges.
Tell me about development in the 9th district.
Well, so I will look at it.
That was your major, right? That was your major: housing, economic development.
So I can tell you this: it's mixed. You can see things in different parts, right? So, for instance, one of the pieces, and I know we'll get back to this, is the number of vacant properties we have. Some of the vacant properties are residential, and I would tell you that the vast majority of those vacant properties are privately owned, right? And so there are certain challenges the city has in terms of dealing with that. That's one piece of it. The other side is that we also have vacant commercial structures and also vacant former schools, and I know you're aware of some of those as well. Those are all opportunities potentially for development, right? Then you also have things like transportation and transportation projects that are coming, right? So I'll look at the Red Line. For those of you who are not familiar, the Red Line was planned to be a 14-mile stretch of light rail connecting from the east side to the west side of the cities, touching the county lines, right? And as a city planner, as a transportation planner, that was something I was engaged in back in 2010 and 2011, prior to even running for office, right? But that was a project that had over $200 million of state money sunk into it. It had a commitment from the federal government of $800 million. So we're talking about $1 billion project that had been canceled by the previous governor, and now you have a current governor who is looking to then reestablish that program. The reason why I mentioned that is not only in terms of the transportation connection, but also what that means in terms of development, right? So you have properties along that route that will also be seen as more desirable and also more connected via transit. That's one piece of it. We had mentioned the universities and the anchors. We can look at, for instance, I know with Bon Secours, right, the Community Resource Center, that was the former library building that had been vacant for several years, right at Hollins and Payson, right? So you have that. You also have, we mentioned the universities as well. I can talk about, for instance, the old Alexander Hamilton Elementary School that have been decommissioned, and now Catholic Charities is engaging on an intergenerational center there. So opportunities for young people, job training, senior programming, and all of that. And then I know you're familiar with, the old Pender Hughes building and the possibilities there with partners like Salvation Army or others who are looking to do it. I can also go back to the Hilton Recreation Center, right, where now that's near Green Street Academy. And what we've been able to do is have a partnership between the Boys and Girls Club and the Baltimore Ravens to redo that, completely renovate that rec center and make it a place that young people and neighborhoods can really thrive, right? So there are different things that are happening, but again, there's so much more that definitely needs to be done. And then again, as we talk about those who are looking at housing, whether it be a whole block strategy and redeveloping some areas like on Mount Street and others, or if you're talking about those who are doing the individual property acquisitions and renovations. So again, it's a mixed bag of all the different types of pieces that are happening. But again, it's important not only to develop the properties, but also develop the communities within them. And that's also part of the one of the things that has to be prominent and upfront.
So I have so many questions to unpack here. Number one, how is an absentee landlord, someone who hasn't been to a property in 10, 15 years, how are they allowed to keep a vacant house in the city of Baltimore, and why?
I'll give you an example of one, and I'm thinking about part of the area that that we cover in terms of about Lafayette Square, and then also you're thinking about how there's going to be some movement and some of our district touching parts of Upton. So I know of a development project. I won't get into all the details of it. Where I might as well I get into it. So if you look at, for instance, the Perry Mitchell House, right, and you think about the redevelopment there are properties that are on that block that have been in disrepair for a number of years. And what happens though is that as long as the property owner, even if they're absentee and even if the property is in disrepair, if they're paying the taxes on it, right, then they still are able to maintain not only the ownership of it, but and if they're also paying for any code violations or abating them, then there is not much the city can do due to their private property rights, right? So again, the city can't just then go and take it. However, there are some additional tools that the city is now able to utilize that can be helpful. So one is this policy referred to as in rem foreclosure. Essentially, when you get to the point where not only the taxes but any of the fines also exceed the value of the property, then the city can then reclaim ownership of it and then dispose of the property to someone who actually wants to do something with it. I know receivership is a program that existed for quite some time. The challenge in many of our neighborhoods is one, yes, getting in contact with a property owner, making sure they do something with it. But in some of our areas, the market, if you will, is not as strong, meaning that even if the property is vacant, there isn't another individual or entity who's interested in developing that property because it may be on a block of other vacants. It may not be seen as one of the focal points, or maybe on a side street or something like that. So oftentimes it gets neglected. And as you know, with vacant properties, especially with out of state or out of town land owners, right, you have the complaints, the dumping, the trash, the structural issues, the water damages affecting other properties. And then it also challenges the other properties in terms of being able to get insurance, being able to have structural stability with their properties. But again, we have, put it this way, I'll give you the sheer number of the 13,000 or so vacant properties we have. Over 75% of those are privately owned. And then I will say over those 13,000 vacant properties, fully 1/3 of those properties are in the 9th district, because we look at what's happened over the years. And so we have so many of those challenges to deal with. And the other point that I would say, because I think we have to also own some of this, there is, yes, the people who have snapped up properties for development purposes. What has also happened is that individuals have said, look, we know that Baltimore is going to be a place that people are looking at. So let's just snap up some properties. And once the market turns, we'll develop them. But until then, we'll sit on those properties. And that's what you're seeing in some of these cases. Folks are sitting on these properties and is waiting for something to happen so the market changes. So they're looking at it from a development pressure point. The other point that I would also mention, and I'm encouraging all of us, and I say us included, to make sure our families have wills and have clear title with these properties. Because what also happens is, say, we have, Big Mama owned the house, Big Mama dies, and now you have 3 and 4 children, and there's no clear title to who owns the property. And so since no one has clear title to it, no one's paying the taxes on it or taking care of the property, it falls in disrepair, falls in the tax sale. There are things like that also happen. We need to make sure that our folks are maintaining these properties. I think about this house and thinking about what happens, with my son and making sure that he has opportunity to move this on, and my other son making sure he has the opportunity, to take ownership of these properties. Because again, there are folks who are looking at this surely from a dollars and cents point of view and not from a neighborhood point of view. And both are important. But again, we have to make sure that we are crossing our T's, dotting our I's, so that our families can benefit from our legacy and not be pushed out and not see these neighborhoods change over, not only from a demographic point, from race and class and the things that come along with that. So I know it's a long answer to a short question, but it's a complicated issue that we wind up dealing with.
Are you telling me that there's nothing that can be done about the vacants with absentee landlords? Are you telling me that there's no legislation that can be put forth, maybe as has been done in Brooklyn or Harlem or DC? Are you telling me we're handcuffed by absentee landlords? There's nothing?
Well, we're not handcuffed, and I wouldn't say there's nothing, but there are challenges. I will tell you this: one of the first bills that I attempted to introduce when I got on the council was looking at the taxing structures for the vacant properties. Right? Do we tax them at a higher level? Right? And that was something that I was like, maybe we do that, because I know they've done that in DC. Right? Now you mentioned, and I can talk about Brooklyn. My sister was born in Brooklyn. Both my parents were Army veterans, right? My mother's a disabled veteran. My father was a veteran. And they met in the Army, and then my mother's from New York, my father's from Philly, and they wound up, moving down to Philadelphia, and that's obviously where I was born, right? But the challenge we had with Baltimore and that type of policy is that the housing market at that point was different than DC's, right? So, for instance, in DC. In the last, and I was in DC, I left there in 2005, right? What was happening also is that if you had a vacant property, right, there was a hot market and you were able to then either sell, develop, and get the return on that investment. Some of these, again, the absentee landowners are in a market where they're not going to see that immediate return on investment. There is that. The other part too is also not only, yes, there are the vast majority of properties are privately owned, but think about the city-owned properties. Does the city have the ability to then dispose of and actually get these properties developed? It's part of the reason why you see this overall effort to then include both the business community and the state to do this, right? So a few months ago, we had an announcement. This was actually done in West Baltimore, right? Because we think about some of the challenges, right? There was Greater Baltimore Committee and Build and Mayor and talking about how we then leverage private capital in terms of the GBC, how we then also, reestablish these buildings, but also it requires a lot of money too, because if the city's going to acquire these properties, right, there has to be, the money in the pot, right? So again, I will tell you this. We went from a population, as many folks know, of 950,000 to now right around, 565,000, right? And those 300,000 people didn't take their houses with them, right? And so now we have properties that in some cases have been vacant for decades that are also structurally unsound, which are going to require hundreds of thousands of dollars to renovate. You also now have the city's fixed pricing structure for vacant properties, trying to get them in the hands of individuals and developers to actually do something with it. But the point, I think that the most critical thing we can look at really is how we can get those properties in the hands of those who could do something with it. You mentioned, Brooklyn and New York City, right? The development pressures are high there, right? You can look at those brownstones and think about the prices they were years ago. Our market has not flipped to the same extent of New York, Philadelphia, and DC, but it's the next thing coming, right? I mean, we're the next.
I don't know. Now you say it's the next thing coming. I take issue with that. I've been hearing that for 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'll tell you this. The reason why I say it is that folks are getting priced out of other markets. What you're finding, and I look at who these folks are who are also looking at properties. You're seeing a lot of folks out of New York, New Jersey, who are then trying to invest in properties. You have a lot of folks from DC who are looking to invest in properties because the price point, they're being priced out of those markets. And the only market that is semi-affordable now is Baltimore. So now whether it develops at the same rate as these other cities, I hear you on that point, right? Because again, a lot of folks have been saying, I remember, I will give you an example. I remember when Baltimore and Live Baltimore is one of the arms that markets the city, right? And I remember when I was living in DC, and I remember seeing these, they had advertisements on the Metro. And I remember it was Baltimore, get in on it. And that was 20 years ago, right? Where you had the city marketing itself in other jurisdictions. Again, there's been some fruit born from that, but again, still not as much, because to your earliest point, Doni, I'll say this. The outward migration we see in cities, in this city, has largely been Black middle-class folks, especially with those with school-age children. So I hear you with that, right? So even though we may be attracting and bringing in new residents, we're still at a net loss because we're also losing some of those legacy folks, or we have been losing some of those legacy folks for some of the reasons you've already mentioned.
The reason that we have not discussed is redlining.
Mm-hmm.
1910, the mayor was J. Barry Mahul. He is known as the father of segregation. Roland Park, The first suburban garden community came online, and those good white folk did not want black people to be able to move into their district. That was 1910. J. Barry Mahul, the mayor, introduced an ordinance. And for those from Baltimore listening, that's how we got a McMecken Street, because there was a black attorney named George McMecken. He hung out around Druid Hill Avenue, and he had a brother-in-law named Ashby Hawkins.
Yes,
both
indeed.
were attorneys, and they were both a nemesis, a collective nemesis against J. Barry Mahul. They were civil rights attorneys, and they dug in his hind parts like white on rice. Mm-hmm. The saddest part of this story is that just a year and a half ago, Hose Heights, a black community adjacent to Roland Park, these people, a historic black community founded by Grandison Ho, some people put up a barrier stopping these people from accessing Roland Avenue. So you think that racism and segregation and that mindset of the losing Confederate Army, you think that would just dissipate, disappear, but it's still here. And so my question to you is, what impact has the ignorance of racism disaffected Baltimore's ability to heal and grow?
So, Donnie Glover, as usual, you were on point. I will say this. One of the things that I mentioned teaching at Towson, literally, we were talking about this in class last week. One of the books that I utilize for my classes in urban government and politics is Not in My Neighborhood. And the subtitle is How Bigotry Shaped a Great American City, right? So that's part of the answer to your question, how bigotry shaped a great American city, right? And so we do know, going back to that segregation ordinance that was passed by the city council in 1910. And one of the things interesting that I'm glad you mentioned W. Ashby Hawkins, because he's also part of that Niagara movement. And what a lot of people don't realize in terms of, that movement is that's also the precursor to the NAACP. And I can talk about, W.B. Du Bois, one of our fraternity brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha, and think about the role that,
who lived in Baltimore at one point.
Oh, yes. And I think about his work in terms of the Philadelphia Negro. We look at, folks like Thurgood Marshall. And the reality, I would also say, right, Baltimore and by extension, Maryland is a very conflicted place. Is it a northern state or a southern state? Northern city and southern city, right? Had Confederate sympathizers, but also was part of the Union by force, right? We have this schizophrenia as it relates to race, and it has shaped many of our neighborhoods. I tell folks, this house that I live in right now, built in 1927, had a restrictive covenant on it, right? Restrictive covenant saying this house may not be leased, sold, conveyed to, occupied by a Negro, right? And we look at how these neighborhoods changed. This one changed from all white to all black, right? The whole history of redlining, blockbusting, white flight, panic peddling, all those things have happened to shape Baltimore neighborhoods. I remember I still talk to my neighbors, talk about how they were the first Black person that lived here, whether they're talking about the Black folks who crossed Fulton Avenue or folks on Pennsylvania Avenue, and talking about that whole historical legacy, right? That you had not only your teachers, dentists, lawyers, doctors, everyone who was in this community. So I say this as an HBCU person, as a person who looks at all these issues in terms of our communities. And not only we look at, I had mentioned the red line and redlining, the highway to nowhere, right? Which bisected, part of our district, the Franklin and Mulberry corridor that have been affected by that highway. There are so many ugly things. And I will tell you this, not only that highway, it cut across our district, but before it cut through the harbor and before it cut through other areas that were not predominantly Black, right? So we do have this whole history in terms of redlining and access. And you look at places like Roland Park, you can go back to the whole mapping of our city. And even now, you can see differences in life expectancy. And I'm not just talking about life expectancy as it relates to things like gun violence and addiction, but also we're talking about, just the proximity to toxins. We look at the lack of access in terms of fresh fruits and vegetables in grocery stores. And all of that is also the legacy of redlining. Those health disparities we see, those are also that legacy of redlining. So again, all of that works together. And I'm looking at this Roland Parks Wayfair Service to Harlem Markets.
Oh, this your girl. She just tuning in. Nicole Orr.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. I will say this: one of the things that folks have mentioned, and Donna, you had mentioned Poe homes earlier. One of the things that we recognize is that even though we have some historic areas in Baltimore, particularly the Highlands Market area, one of the oldest parts of the city. Highlands Market actually one of the oldest community operating public market in the city. The challenge, though, is as great and how beautiful that is in terms of history. We also have historic old infrastructure. And now we're talking about the millions of dollars that needs to then rehab that, right? So we had a meeting with affected property owners in the last week, and now some of them are actually being, having direct contact. But it's going to take an overall capital investment in this area. And one of the things you also see is that it's going to be tens of millions of dollars at least. Because we're talking about
University of Maryland spent a ton of money on something underground utility related, water or something.
I know that they've had some investments over the years. I know some of the other larger developers had investments over the years. Even some of the larger nonprofits have also done some of that. But again, it's not sufficient in terms of what has to happen in terms of the overall water mains and valves. And, because again, you look at water main breaks we've had over the years in this area and in others. So it's a fiscal issue. But also one of the things I'll mention is those properties in Roland Park and in those areas, those are also newer construction too. But the point is, and you're right, historically, areas of higher income and that were predominantly white have had more attention and more investment over the years. And now we have to continue to fight this battle in terms of investment and attention in our communities, and the same ones that have also been challenged over time. So again, these are some of this is part of the legacy that we deal with, because we can recognize that some of these investments could have been made decades ago and they weren't, and now we're living with some of the consequences of that.
They weren't made simply because of race.
Not going to argue that point, because again, history bears that
out. we all suffer, and that's my challenge. I'm not sure if Antero Patella says this and Not in My Backyard in this book, NIMBY, well noted. Might as well throw in The Black Butterfly.
Absolutely.
My question is, when does white Baltimore see that your lack of investment in black Baltimore cuts everybody's throat? When Stephanie Rawlins Blake was mayor, she got this money from Obama, similar to rescue money. And I remember all of that money going downtown. Nothing to East Baltimore, nothing to West Baltimore. The money went downtown. She even took money from our recreation centers.
Mm-hmm.
Her, Kiefer Mitchell, Bill Cole. Was it those two? Yeah. Kiefer Mitchell and Bill Cole. You were just coming on the scene then.
Yeah, and let me add something else. I don't mean to rub the sore even more raw, but let me give you this. Remember the Baltimore Grand Prix?
That's what I was about to say.
I know that's where the money went. Yeah.
They put it on a damn Grand Prix that lasted 2, maybe 3 years, and then it was gone. And you like, did we just get flim-flam by a chick from Ashburton? Because Ashburton isn't known for street hustlers, but that was some street hustle stuff. You took our money. You took it down to the harbor. The harbor, which is dead. It's dead.
And so, Doni, this is an interesting point too, because I know some folks, talk about, wait a minute, now Pratt Street is redone in terms of this, Grand Prix and all that. And then, since you mentioned the harbor, we should talk about this too, because one of the challenges I have, even when I'm talking, to our students, is we look at development, right? And development downtown, and sometimes it's downtown versus the neighborhoods. I don't think it has to be versus the neighborhoods, but historically it's been seen as that. Because again, folks will say, look, we need to develop the harbor because that's part of the breadbasket of the city, right? You have to have the tourism and entertainment because the city has shifted, right? If you think about what happened from the 70s and 80s, the city shifted and said, hey, we know we're not going to be a manufacturing town anymore. So we're going to shift toward education and medicine, hence some of the institutions you mentioned, the hospitals and universities, you have that. And so education, medicine, technology, and tourism and entertainment, right? And so that's kind of been the flip. And so putting, the resources into there. And that could be impactful, but it can't be the only thing. And you have to couple that with investments in neighborhoods. It can't just be one to the exclusion of others.
That's the answer?
Look, the reality is this. That's what happened, right? We do recognize that. Again, you think about where we look at the redevelopment of Harbor now, right? You think about what they're trying to do, right? Whether, depending on, who you're
Let's
talking
talk
to.
about that.
Yeah. Right. So
You got a black man who's got properties around the country developing the harbor. Great job, Brandon. Now, let me just say, since I mentioned Mayor Brandon Scott, I do think that Mayor Brandon Scott should have G-checked the fire union, the white guy with the fire union. He called Sheila Dixon a mutt of a mayor. I think Brandon failed and missed an opportunity to G-check that young man right away and ask him in turn, how is your mutt of a mother doing? But he missed that opportunity, because calling that woman a mutt of a mayor, I mean, you might as well call her the B word. Don't be a coward.
No, that's a tough one, because I think about I was talking to my sister the other day. My mother, who's no longer with us. Mother of my children. I wouldn't want to see anybody refer to any of them.
Wrong is wrong. Whether it's me, him, or anybody else, it's wrong. And they don't play that. I mean, we grew up in an era where you get punched in your mouth for calling that. So, nonetheless, I interrupt.
No, but the development of Harbor. No, I think you make a point. So what I will say is, you have a developer, black man from Baltimore West Side.
We have Peter.
Yeah, and I think that is. I've seen one. I'll say I just think that developer. I think it's the right time and the right person. I'm glad to see that. What I will.
These white people are leaning on him simply because he's black. That's the only thing I can see. They said a damn thing. That harbor ain't had no damn attention in 20 years. Ain't nobody said SHIT, sugar, honey, iced tea. Nobody said a damn word. Soon as a black man go down there, you'd have messed this damn thing up like George W. Bush. Then they bring in Obama to clean up your mess. Oh, go sit down and have a damn seat. You want something to complain about? Come up here to North Avenue. Let me show you Penn North. Son.
Exactly. So look. Here's the deal, and I'll try to be as fair as possible with it. The reality is, I've seen the plans, right, and a lot of people have seen the plans, and I'm like, this actually looks good, right? The other part of it, and to your point, that the harbor has not been the active center that it once was. Right? You have all the business, ghost town, right? A lot of the businesses that were chain businesses, might I add, a lot of them have gone. So the idea overpriced chain. And so now if we think about, okay, what does a reimagining look like? And I will tell you this, it was interesting to look at the testimony. So you're in council chambers, you hear the testimony, and a lot of us are looking around, you're thinking about who's testifying against it and what their perspectives are. And I guess that there's a racial dynamic, there was an age dynamic, and also just, an attachment to the old versus what's the new. Now, again, I'm all about, our historical legacy in the city, right? We have to respect, what came before us, but at the same time, we have to think about what are the possibilities for the future. And so a lot of folks are talking about, wait a minute, he's talking about residential downtown. Yes, because, and you mentioned New York City earlier, a lot of the cities are recognizing that in order for the city to actually remain viable, even in downtown areas, the residential piece is part of it. Residential residential drives retail. So if you want to have a people who are going to shop, who are going to patronize businesses, having that market already down there, and also talking about more eyes on the street and all that. So people come up, when people want to block something, they come up with all kinds of excuses. Oh, the heights are too high. Oh, it's too many people on the street. Oh, the parking. People will come up with all kinds of reasons, but the reality is that we're talking about the future of Baltimore City. We have to reimagine it, and I think that's part of it.
Save the best for last. What's up with these damn bike lanes, bro?
So I'll say this.
We don't want these little flex posts. You can damn near wreck your car in those narrow situations where the damn flex post is damn near in the middle of the damn street. And all you're trying to do is make a damn right turn. I mean, look at the way they did Mount Royal right there as you're getting ready to get on 83. If you didn't pay attention, you would have wrecked your car because they put up a curb all of a sudden out of nowhere right down Mount Royal. Maybe the white people got a memo. I didn't get a memo. I damn near ended up inside that damn tall glass building that Eddie Brown and them paid for. But I'm just saying, when Artscape came, they shut that joint down. I mean, damn, you would have thought the Ku Klux Klan were having that annual rally the way they shut North Avenue down. Traffic was backed up from North and 83 all the way back to North and Fulton. And some damn idiot at planning thinks that we need a single damn lane of traffic. It's utterly ridiculous. Last point. Coming back from Morgan, did a 7 a.m. show at WEAA. Got back, thought I was going to get back not long after 8 o'clock a.m. But your man's in them. I'm calling him out. Senator Antonio Hayes, little man, says that we don't need 3 lanes of traffic. Well, Senator Hayes, you live up there on Liberty Heights. When the last time has Senator Hayes had to go through that long traffic down there on North Avenue? Because I can tell you, nobody's having fun sitting in them lanes. And me and them going to fight, because nobody I've met in the black community wants a damn bike lane. And do you know that they wanted to planning? And these white people in planning. Now, one black, they had a young black man, looked like he was the sergeant at arms, and he was there to intimidate any of us older black people who were going to tell them white people from planning, y'all ain't expanding no damn sidewalk and narrowing our street. But they wanted to expand the sidewalk 20 feet on both sides and narrow Fremont Avenue and take out the red light at Fremont and Lawrence. And it's like, are you smoking dope?
I remember that issue about the light because our office got involved with that. So I hear you exactly there. Let me also say this. I feel your passion, and let me add to it. So, I don't always divulge on this, but I know that intersection very well because after I drop my son off at Mount Royal Elementary Middle, right? So I have the son who attends Baltimore City Schools, and then I get on, and to get on 83, I have to go that route. So I know exactly the area you're talking about. I have to get, so I feel you, I experience it myself. The point you made about, planners, remember I told you, like, I'm a planner, I'm a former transportation planner. And the reason why I got into planning is that there were not a lot of people who looked like us at the table earlier on. If you look at a lot of plans that happened, not only in the 60s, 70s, but even now, one of the things that we learn in planning school and our folks on community development, you can't do it without the people, right? And so you have to have folks at the table. Who is your target audience, right? Is this something
and you can't have a meeting in a church, JB, and not even say a prayer to God? These white people from planning had a meeting in St. James Episcopal Church right there in Church Square, and they never acknowledged the good Lord. They are going to hell.
Well, I will say this, one of the people who I do really appreciate is Father Meadows over at St. James, and so I'm going to actually be talking to him in a little bit. I'll just, I'll
go in church and you ain't going to say thank you, Lord.
Look, in house,
what kind of heathen is that in this so-called Christian nation that they send out children to fight wars for? In God we trust. Them people need to get their foolishness out of the way because they messing up progress, expanding the sidewalk. Where are we going to park?
Look,
then you had a little slanted parking spots.
I get that we have to have multiple ways for folks to get around. We have to do it in a sensible way, right? So
and Senator Hayes will say this thing, oh, nobody in West Baltimore got a car. That's what Antonio Hayes said. Nobody in West Baltimore got a car. They all catching the bus. No, we not.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm about to hop in my car and head to City Hall for a hearing. But I will say this, we have to, understand that. Yes, sure, there are people who are biking, who are walking and all that. So pedestrians, bicyclists, that's great.
Who catching the bike? Who riding the bike in Who riding the bike in your district?
I hear you. I don't have a bike. I will tell you that.
Do you see people riding bikes in your district?
I don't see it very frequently. I'll put it that way. I don't see.
Not
I don't
enough
see
to
it
have a
very
damn flex post in the middle of the street and you wreck your damn car because of single lane traffic. It's utterly. Where did they get this idea from? Dude, I'm trying to go cross town. You charge me an exorbitant amount of car insurance because of where I live, and then you will make my entrance and exit from West Baltimore difficult. And look at North Avenue. All of these lanes wide open. And then you got an MTA police messing with somebody because they rode in that red. You damn right we riding in that red lane. Ride on, people. Let's not bring no bike on North Avenue.
Look, I said I hear you because you're not the only one who's raising that flag. But again, we
And
have
how
to.
does Ryan Dorsey get to do all of this? Who's standing up against Ryan Dorsey? Does he have kids? Does he have kids? Because I bet he wouldn't put no kid on his bike.
So I've seen people do that. I wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't put my damn kid. Have you seen these drivers?
I will say this. I know that I won't put it all on Councilman Dorsey, but he has been the champion, if you will, for bike lane. He's a bicyclist, and so that's something that's very.
He ain't got no kids. He ain't got no family because ain't nobody putting their kids on a bike or their mother. They got to go pick up their mother from the nursing home or something.
I'd be afraid to do so because I don't find it to be as safe. And I think that's part of the challenge we deal with. Folks will say, well, look, we need to have infrastructure in terms of safety for people to bicycle. But again, when you do that, you have to include the communities, right? Again, is this something the community desires? How is the community going to work with this? And again, you can't push things on communities. So again, I appreciate your candor, your passion, because I know you love the city, you care about it, but also you're covering the issues. And I'll just give you kudos about the news before the news because you've always been that guy.
Flattery will get you everything. You know anything about Druid Park Drive? Like when we're going to get our damn reservoir back? Because some of us just want to run around the damn reservoir. They got that 3 and down to 1 lane traffic. It's just
that was a big part of my running route. I used to do that 1.5 mile loop. I would do that, and then I would go back to the back.
How long does it take for them to finish?
It's my understanding, and I know it's right outside of our district, but my understanding it'll be within the next year or two that should be done. But yeah,
they're waiting on us to die. They're waiting on us to die to let Black people finally see some progress.
But we can't wait that long, and we're not going to wait that long. But again, I appreciate you, giving the opportunity and just having this kind of conversation. Just thank you for it, and just keep us all on our toes.
All right, we got 3 more minutes. I got to ask you about the state of public education. You mentioned education, something you said, but Sandra Lisa, she's making $400,000 a year. Do we keep her or let her go? A lot of us say it's time for her to go. Sayonara, senora.
I've heard it in both ways, right? But I've heard a lot of folks that are not pleased with what's going on in our schools. Just like I would say for any person, I don't think you can put it at the feet or at the hands of one individual. At the same time, I get some of the concern, as I've heard from principals, from teachers who have not felt, heard. Like I said, I have great respect for Dr. Santelises in terms of the conversation we had, but at the same time, the product may not be what people want. The other part that I would say, and this is why, I'm getting at, I say as an educator, as a father, right? There are certain things I'm responsible for, right? Making sure that my, that my young
her kid don't go to Baltimore City public schools, do they?
I know at one point they did, and I don't know where they are now. I know she has daughters, and I don't know what age bracket they're in. But again, people have the choice in terms of education. But I will say this: as an educator, as an educator and a father, it's my job to make sure my young men are fed and they have sleep and they're ready to get to school and they have the books at home and I'm helping them through their homework. And I recognize that I am very privileged, right? So yes, I'm a first generation college student, but I have a PhD. My son's mother has a master's degree, right? So they can help with their homework at home. They have people who are looking over their shoulder and making sure they're doing the right thing. Not every family is in that position, and not every student has that support system at home. So young people who come to school, whether they have dealt with violence or crime in their neighborhood or in their home, or dealing with assault on the way to school, or dealing with being hungry, those are young people that our teachers are dealing with, right? And so again, the challenges that are outside the classroom, I feel those, and then inside the classroom, what are we dealing with? And I would also say, even though COVID is several years ago, we're still dealing with the aftermath. I look at my sons and I think about some of the things they didn't get during that time period, and the catch up that we're doing. And so I understand that there may need to be some shakeup. And I'll say this, and I'll be fair about this as well. As a sports fan, one of the things we see oftentimes is that, a new coach can be hired, right? That, maybe we have to go in a different direction. Maybe it isn't that the coach is terrible, but maybe we have to go in a different direction. And so I understand that, right? So if you're talking about the CEO, if you're talking about, the head coach, if you will, then maybe there has to be another decision being made. And I know that's top of the mind for some people.
We need some new recreation centers. Seems to me that the city of Baltimore, you take the map where all of these murders and shootings are happening, and give them places a brand new recreation center. Cherry Hill is nice, Cahill is nice, but I'm talking about 24th and Greenmount. I'm talking about John E. Howard. I'm talking about Lillian Jones. They took our recreation center. You know, we lost our community center back in 07 to Sharfstein. Somebody gave it to Sharfstein. Our community center in Sandtown. We had it going on. So sometimes we wonder if our black elected officials, not yourself, because you weren't there at the time, if they're paying attention. And by the way, do you have somebody to pass the ball to? Because you only got one more time if you win this one.
I'll just say I agree with you about the recreation. So look, I talk about, you know, being a runner. I got my sons involved in athletics and enrichment programs. We need that, right? And so we need centers for that, and that could be the heart of our community. So again, I have no disagreement there, and I thank you again for the time.
Any final thoughts? You want to make a closing statement why people should vote for you here in the city of Baltimore? I give you the screen. You just got to end off by saying, "Good morning, world."
All right. So again, you know, Councilman John Bullock, I've been representing the 9th District, elected in 2016 and reelected in 2020. I think the work we've done speaks for us, whether that's passing the funding mechanism for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, whether it is things around alligating and greening, whether it's even in this term, creating historic districts that preserve Black legacy home ownership, that also extended tax credits for folks to take advantage of in order to reestablish and redevelop their neighborhoods. You know, I'm someone who's been in the trenches. I'm fortunate to have the support of some of our progressive organizations, some of our working class families. Again, I mentioned as being someone who is, you know, from the working class, who's also had the opportunity to do quite well for himself and his family, but also things I want for my family, I want for your families. And so, again, as we gear up and get ready for, you know, May 14th, again, take advantage of the opportunity. I'll be seeing you out there. And again, this is, you know, just the future of our city, not only in West and Southwest Baltimore, but the future of Baltimore as a whole. So again, I tell you to go out and vote. Again, Councilman John Bullock, you can find me on Facebook at Councilman John Bullock, Twitter at Doc Bullock, and also Instagram at Doc Bullock. And I'll just say good morning, world, and God bless you.